Picture this. It's 2:47 in the morning. You're awake, not because of noise, not because of light, but because your brain has decided this is the perfect time to simulate every possible financial disaster that could happen tomorrow. The car makes a weird sound. Your laptop freezes, your company announces layoffs, your dog starts limping, and suddenly your ceiling looks less like drywall and more like a projection screen for worst-case scenarios. If that feels uncomfortably familiar, good, because today we're going to talk about the single financial milestone that quietly eliminates most of those 3 AM spirals. Not $1 million, not some passive income fantasy, not retiring at 27 on a beach in Miami. Today we're going to talk about a number that most people underestimate, a number that doesn't make you rich, doesn't change your lifestyle overnight, but quietly changes how you think, sleep, negotiate, and make decisions. If you've ever felt like you're one expense away from chaos, this is for you. And before we go any further, I want this to be interactive. As you're watching, think about where you are right now. Are you building your first 1,000? Are you rebuilding? Are you already stable but trying to level up? Because the goal here isn't just information, it's transformation. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why $10,000 is less about money and more about identity, stress hormones, decision fatigue, and the strange psychological shift that separates people who constantly feel behind from people who move through life with quiet control. If this kind of content actually helps you think differently about money, consider subscribing and give the video a like, but only if you genuinely find it useful. No pressure. Now let's talk about the number that changes everything. The $10,000 that will change the way you think about money forever. When you have no savings, your brain lives in survival mode. Every purchase becomes a calculation. Every minor inconvenience feels like a potential financial collapse. You stand in the grocery aisle debating between 2 snack options like you're conducting a high-level budget summit. Not because you care deeply about barbecue versus sea salt, but because the 90-cent difference feels like it might matter more than it should. A check engine light doesn't mean inconvenience, it means threat. And when your brain perceives constant financial threat, it floods your system with stress hormones that make long-term thinking almost impossible. You're not bad with money, you're stressed with money, and there is a difference. Let's slow that down. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, money stops being a tool and starts being oxygen. Every dollar leaving your account feels like a tiny gasp. You're not asking, do I want this? You're asking, can I survive this? That distinction rewires everything. Imagine you're at the gas station. You glance at the pump numbers climbing. $43, $48, $52. You're not annoyed, you're slightly tense, because that $52 might overlap with groceries, or utilities, or the subscription you forgot was renewing tomorrow. Now multiply that micro-stress by 50 decisions per day. Snack aisle decisions, parking fees, delivery charges, friend invites you out for dinner, and you mentally run the math before responding. It is exhausting. And here's where it becomes dangerous. When your nervous system is constantly activated by financial stress, your body produces elevated cortisol. Cortisol is useful when you're being chased by a tiger. It is less useful when you're trying to plan a retirement account. Chronic financial stress shrinks your ability to think long-term. It narrows your focus to immediate threats. This is not a character flaw, it is biology. Scarcity forces short-term thinking. Studies in behavioral economics consistently show that when people feel financially constrained, their cognitive bandwidth drops. It's like your brain is running too many background applications. You still function, but slower, foggy, reactive. So instead of negotiating your salary, you just accept it. Instead of comparing insurance quotes, you renew automatically. Instead of researching investment options, you tell yourself you'll look into it next month, because survival is louder than strategy. And the worst part, you start believing this state is normal. You tell yourself you're just not disciplined enough, not motivated enough, not financially smart. But the truth is much less dramatic. You're overloaded. When every unexpected expense feels catastrophic, your system stays on high alert. A minor car repair isn't a repair. It's a domino that might knock over rent. A medical copay isn't inconvenient. It's destabilizing. That is what living without a financial cushion does. It turns normal life volatility into perceived disaster. And here's something subtle that most people never articulate. When you're constantly calculating, you start resenting money. You associate it with restriction, with embarrassment, with tension. Social situations become stressful because you're quietly running numbers in your head while pretending to listen to the conversation. You might decline invitations not because you don't want to go, but because you don't want to explain why you can't afford to. That quiet shame compounds, and when you're operating from that place, wealth building feels abstract. Retirement accounts feel theoretical. Investing feels like something other people do. Because your brain is busy solving today. This is the paycheck to paycheck brain. It is defensive, it is vigilant, it is reactive, and most importantly, it is tired. Understanding this is critical because it reframes the entire conversation. The goal of building savings is not just to stack money, it is to calm the nervous system. It is to move from survival calculations to strategic thinking. Before we even talk about opportunity or investing or confidence, we have to understand the baseline. Without savings, you are constantly playing defense. And defense, over time, is exhausting. Which brings us to what happens when that pressure finally lifts. Something subtle but powerful happens the first time you see a 5-figure balance in your bank account. It's not dramatic. There's no confetti, no dramatic orchestral soundtrack. You don't suddenly feel wealthy. In fact, you might look at the number and think, that's it? But your nervous system notices $10,000 is not luxury money, it's stability money. It quietly covers the vast majority of financial curveballs that derail people. Most car repairs fall well under $3,000. Most urgent medical bills, especially with insurance, are uncomfortable but manageable within that range. Even short-term job gaps can be bridged for several months if your lifestyle is reasonable. This means something profound. The world stops feeling like it can knock you out with a single punch. And that shift from fragile to stable is enormous. When you move from 0 to 10,000, you don't just increase your bank balance. You decrease your baseline anxiety. You go from one unexpected expense away from chaos to one unexpected expense away from inconvenience. That distinction matters more than people realize. Before the 5-figure mark, money feels scarce and slippery. Every dollar that leaves your account feels permanent and threatening. After the 5-figure mark, money begins to feel like a buffer. You're not thinking, if this happens, I'm ruined. You're thinking, if this happens, I'll handle it. And that sentence alone changes how you move through life. Let's make this practical. Your company announces restructuring, layoffs are possible. If you have $200 in savings, your body reacts instantly. Heart rate up, worst case scenarios firing. You update your resume in a panic. You start mentally calculating how long before rent is due. If you have $10,000 saved, you still care. You're still alert. But you are not spiraling. You have time, you have margin, you have options. That breathing room allows you to think strategically instead of desperately, and strategy produces better outcomes. Here's where psychology becomes critical. When you feel safe, your brain shifts out of survival mode and into executive function. The part of your brain responsible for planning, negotiation, creativity, and long-term thinking becomes more active. You're no longer just reacting, you're analyzing. $10,000 doesn't make you rich, but it moves you out of fragility, and fragility is the real enemy. Fragility means one mistake destroys momentum. One accident wipes out progress. One missed paycheck sends you backwards. Stability means mistakes are survivable. This is why the 5-figure switch is so powerful. It's not about consumption. Most people who reach this milestone don't suddenly start spending wildly. In fact, many barely change their lifestyle at all. What changes is internal. You walk differently, you negotiate differently, you tolerate nonsense less, because you're no longer cornered, and when you're not cornered, you stop making cornered decisions. This is also where something counterintuitive happens. When people hit $10,000, they often become more thoughtful with money, not less, because now money represents progress. It represents proof. It represents identity. You start thinking, if I built this once, I can build it again. That belief compounds, but it begins here, at 5 figures, at the point where life shifts from constantly bracing for impact to quietly knowing you can absorb it. And once you feel that shift, even subtly, you can never unfeel it, which leads directly into what happens next. There is a massive difference between panic and mild annoyance. And financially, that difference is often about $10,000. Let's say your car makes that sound. You know the one. Not loud enough to be dramatic, just subtle enough to be concerning. If you have no savings, your brain doesn't interpret that sound as mechanical. It interprets it as financial threat. You're not thinking about spark plugs, you're thinking about rent, credit cards, borrowing money. rearranging bills. You feel the tightening in your chest before you even call the mechanic. Now replay the exact same scenario with $10,000 sitting quietly in your account. The sound is still there, you're still mildly irritated, but your body doesn't spike. You schedule the appointment, you prepare for the estimate, you deal with it. The situation hasn't changed, your reaction has, and reaction is everything. Financial panic is rarely about the event itself, it's about what the event represents. When you're living without a cushion, every expense feels like a domino that could knock over your entire system. A $500 repair isn't $500, it's the beginning of a cascade. But when you have margin, expenses return to their proper size. They become isolated problems instead of existential threats. That shift from emotional to logistical thinking is enormous. Emotional thinking sounds like this. Why does this always happen to me? I can't afford this. This is going to ruin everything. Logistical thinking sounds like this. Okay, what's the cost? What are my options? How do I minimize the damage? Same event, different nervous system. And here's where it gets interesting. When you remove constant financial panic, you free up cognitive bandwidth. You sleep better because your brain isn't running worst-case simulations at 3 a.m. You perform better at work because your focus isn't split between spreadsheets and survival math. You're more patient in relationships because your irritability isn't fueled by hidden money anxiety. Financial stress leaks. It leaks into tone, it leaks into posture, it leaks into conversations. You might think you're just tired, or short-tempered, or distracted, but often you're financially strained. When that strain lifts, even slightly, everything stabilizes. And this is why $10,000 creates ripple effects far beyond the number itself. It doesn't make you immune to problems, it makes problems proportional. Proportional problems are manageable. Catastrophic problems are paralyzing. There's also something subtle that happens when panic disappears. You stop rushing. When you're broke, urgency becomes your default setting. You make fast decisions because you feel like you have to. You accept the first repair quote, the first job offer, the first loan approval, because speed feels safer than risk. But when you're operating from mild annoyance instead of panic, you pause. You get a second quote. You negotiate. You think. And thinking is profitable. This is one of the most overlooked benefits of a financial cushion. It slows you down in the best possible way. It gives you the emotional regulation required to make rational decisions. And rational decisions compound. $10,000 does not eliminate stress. Life will always be unpredictable. But it changes the intensity. It turns chaos into inconvenience, threat into task, panic into planning. And once you experience that shift, you realize something important. You were never bad at handling money. You were just handling it from a state of fear. Now that fear is quieter. And when fear quiets down, strategy finally gets a microphone. Which brings us to the part nobody talks about. The identity shift that makes saving sustainable in the first place. The hardest part of saving $10,000 is not mathematical, it is psychological. Most people approach saving like a temporary diet. They slash spending, cancel everything, say no to every invite, survive on financial broccoli and tap water for 3 months. And then, inevitably, they burn out and swing back in the opposite direction. Because restriction without identity change never lasts. The people who reach 5 figures do something different. They stop trying to save money, and they start becoming someone who saves money. That sounds subtle. It is not. When saving is something you are trying to do, it feels optional. It feels negotiable. It feels like something you can skip this month because you deserve a break. But when saving becomes part of who you are, the conversation changes. You don't ask, should I save this month? You ask, what would someone who builds wealth do here? That shift affects everything. You're in the snack aisle again, not stressed this time, but aware. Instead of automatically grabbing whatever is on sale or whatever is convenient, you pause. Not because you're desperate, but because you've trained yourself to evaluate spending through a different lens. Does this align with my goals? Is this worth the trade-off? That pause is identity in action. And here's what's fascinating. Once you see yourself as a saver, your brain starts scanning for opportunities to reinforce that identity. You notice subscriptions you forgot about. You renegotiate insurance, you bring lunch more often, not because you're suffering, but because it fits the story you now believe about yourself. I am someone who builds stability. Identity drives behavior more reliably than motivation ever will. Motivation fades when you're tired. Identity remains when you're exhausted. This is why the first $1,000 feels brutal. You are fighting your old habits. You are pushing against your previous identity. It feels unnatural, forced. But around 3,000, 5,000, something shifts. Saving stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like progress. You begin to experience a quiet pride when you transfer money into savings. You start tracking net worth, not obsessively, but curiously. You realize that watching the number grow feels better than a random impulse purchase ever did. That is the beginning of long-term wealth psychology. And it compounds, because once you prove to yourself that you can build $10,000, your self-image expands. You are no longer someone trying to survive the month. You are someone capable of building financial foundations. That belief alone changes your ceiling. It affects how you negotiate salary, how you think about investing, how you approach risk. You stop saying, "I'm bad with money," and start saying, "I'm learning how to manage it strategically." That language matters. Your brain listens to how you describe yourself. If you tell yourself you're irresponsible, your actions will subconsciously match that label. If you tell yourself you're building discipline, you start acting in alignment with that narrative. $10,000 is not just a savings goal. It is proof of concept. Proof that you can delay gratification. Proof that you can be consistent. Proof that you can override short-term impulses for long-term security. And once that proof exists, it becomes very difficult to return to your old financial identity. You start thinking differently about future goals. The next 10,000 feels possible. Investing feels accessible. Retirement accounts feel relevant instead of abstract. Because you are no longer an outsider to financial stability. You are participating in it. This is the part most financial advice ignores. It focuses on tactics, budgets, percentages, spreadsheets. But tactics without identity are fragile. Identity makes tactics automatic. And once you have the identity of someone who builds wealth, something even more interesting happens. You stop playing pure defense. You begin looking for opportunity, which is exactly where the next shift begins. $10,000 does not make you rich. Let's get that out of the way immediately. You're not retiring early. You're not buying apartment buildings in cash. You're not suddenly immune to budgets. But what it does give you is breathing room. And breathing room is the foundation of intelligent risk-taking. When you have no savings, risk feels reckless. Even small opportunities look dangerous because there's no margin for error. A $2,000 certification course doesn't look like an investment. It looks like rent. A $50 networking event doesn't look like access. It looks like groceries. So you avoid, not because you lack ambition, but because you lack cushion. Now imagine the same scenario with $10,000 behind you. That certification program that could increase your salary by $8,000 or $10,000 per year. It's still a serious decision, but now you can evaluate it logically. You start asking about ROI. ROI stands for return on investment. It simply means this: if I put money into something, how much money do I get back relative to what I spent? If you spend $2,000 on a course and it helps you land a job that pays $10,000 more per year, that's a strong return. Your initial investment paid for itself multiple times over. But you can only think that way when you're not worried about next month's bills. Without savings, you don't calculate ROI, you calculate survival. With savings, you calculate trajectory. That is a completely different mindset. Or let's say your job has become quietly miserable. Not dramatic, just draining. You've thought about leaving, but the idea of a gap between paychecks feels terrifying. With no savings, you tolerate more than you should. With savings, you explore. You update your resume calmly, you apply selectively, you negotiate from stability instead of fear. And here's something important. People can sense desperation, employers can, clients can, business partners can. When you do not urgently need the deal, you negotiate differently. You ask better questions, you walk away from low offers, you protect your time. Financial breathing room creates psychological leverage, and leverage increases earnings over time. This is why people with modest savings often see career acceleration, not because the money directly causes promotions, but because the optionality it creates changes behavior. Optionality is power, the ability to say no, the ability to wait, the ability to choose. When you are financially cornered, your choices shrink. When you have margin, your choices expand. And expanded choices compound. Maybe you take a role with slightly lower starting pay but higher growth potential because you can afford to think long-term. Maybe you build a side skill that increases your market value over 2 years instead of chasing quick overtime shifts. None of these moves are reckless, they are calculated, and calculated risk is how income grows sustainably. This is also where something counterintuitive happens. When you feel secure, you often become more disciplined, not less. Because now you are protecting progress. You have proof that consistency works. You are less likely to sabotage your foundation with impulsive decisions. $10,000 is not venture capital. It is foundation capital. It gives you stability first, growth second. Without a base, opportunity feels dangerous. With a base, opportunity feels strategic. You move from asking, can I survive this, to asking, will this improve my trajectory? And that shift is where financial momentum begins. But there's one more subtle transformation that happens when you have a cushion. It reduces the exhausting number of survival-based micro-decisions you make every day. And that mental freedom might be one of the most underrated benefits of all. Every single day, you make an absurd number of tiny financial decisions, generic or name brand, drive or walk, order delivery or cook, upgrade or keep the old version, fill the tank today or stretch it until Friday. When you have no savings, none of these are casual choices. They are calculations. And calculations require energy. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. The more decisions you make, the worse you get at making them. Your brain has a limited amount of high-quality decision-making power each day. When that power is drained by constant survival math, your judgment suffers. Living paycheck to paycheck forces you to run cost-benefit analysis dozens of times before noon. You are not choosing based on preference, you are choosing based on fear. And fear-based decision-making is exhausting. You stand in the snack aisle debating a $2 difference not because you care deeply about flavor, but because that $2 represents margin. It represents safety. It represents whether something else later in the week might feel tight. That constant vigilance burns cognitive bandwidth. And here's the part most people miss. When your brain is busy calculating survival, it has less capacity for strategic thinking. You procrastinate bigger financial moves because you're mentally drained from smaller ones. You ignore long-term planning because you're fatigued from short-term management. Now imagine walking into that same store with $10,000 in savings. You're not reckless, you're not throwing items into the cart without thinking. But you are calmer, you choose based on preference, not panic. That shift sounds minor. It isn't. When small decisions stop draining you, you have energy left for important decisions. You finally compare investment accounts. You research retirement plans, you review insurance policies, you optimize your budget intentionally instead of reactively. Your mind becomes clearer. And clarity compounds. There's also something powerful about removing constant micro-scarcity. When every dollar feels life or death, money feels scarce and fragile. But when you have a cushion, individual dollars feel less emotionally charged. They are still important, but they are not loaded with existential weight. This makes you more rational. Ironically, feeling less pressure often leads to better financial discipline. You stop impulse spending driven by stress. You stop making emotional purchases to compensate for anxiety. You make calmer, more aligned decisions. $10,000 does not remove financial responsibility. It removes financial hypervigilance. And that difference changes how you experience daily life. You wake up without an immediate mental checklist of threats. You check your bank account without bracing. You make purchases without guilt or panic. You operate from preference instead of scarcity. That mental freedom might be one of the most underrated financial milestones in existence. Because once your decisions are no longer driven by fear, they start being driven by intention. And intention is where real wealth begins to form. Now you know what you need to do, or maybe you've already done it. Maybe you're halfway there. Maybe you're sitting at 3,000. Maybe you just crossed 5 figures and didn't even realize the psychological shift was happening. Wherever you are, this is the moment that matters. Because $10,000 is not about the number. It's about the decision to stop living in constant reaction mode. It's about choosing stability over chaos, strategy over survival, intention over impulse. And here's something important. None of this happens overnight. It happens transfer by transfer, month by month, identity shift by identity shift. You don't wake up financially stable, you build it. And the person you become while building it is more valuable than the balance itself. So here's what I'd love you to do. Share where you are right now in the comments. Are you building your first 1,000? Are you rebuilding after a setback? Have you already crossed 10,000 and felt that mental shift? Talk about it. Let's build a space where people aren't pretending to be perfect. a space where we talk honestly about money, about progress, about mistakes, about wins. Because the truth is, we all learn from someone. Someone reading your comment might be one step behind you and need exactly the lesson you already learned. Someone might be one step ahead and offer insight you haven't considered yet. Who knows? Your next accountability partner could come from a comment thread. Your next business idea could start in a reply. Your next breakthrough might come from a conversation you didn't expect to have. Financial growth does not have to be isolating. It can be collaborative. So share your goal, share your experience, share what you're working toward. And if this video gave you clarity, direction, or even just a small mindset shift, subscribe. Stick around. We're building something long-term here. Not hype, not fantasy, real financial stability, real identity shifts, real progress. And remember, the first 10,000 is not about money. It's about proving to yourself that you are no longer surviving. You are building. I'll see you in the next one.